Today we're reviewing an Athletic article by Mark Lazarus interviewing Jonathan Toews of the Blackhawks. It sure sounds like after the Brandon Hagel trade yesterday that the Blackhawks may be going down a much deeper rebuild than many of us might have thought, and some really big names could be involved in some blockbuster trades could be on the move, if not before the deadline, then early this offseason. We'll discuss the possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're reviewing an article regarding the Blackhawks and some potential additional trades we might see as this team heads into a full-scale rebuild. We saw a pretty substantial trade yesterday involving the Blackhawks trading forward Brandon Hagel to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they get a pretty good haul in return, getting two young players and Taylor Raddysh and Boris Katchouk, who are actually slightly older than Hagel, not by much, but still the same age group really, and two first-round picks. Now, of course, a couple of things with that trade. Obviously, Hagel was becoming a really popular player, an important player in Chicago, really improved a ton in the past year, and kind of, got himself a regular spot. Like I said, was just becoming a big piece of that team. But the price tag that the Lightning were willing to pay just made it impossible for Chicago to refuse that kind of a trade offer. Now, of course, he's not making a ton of money, under $2 million. He had 2 more years in his contract, and I guess the way the Hawks were looking at it is by the time that contract extension is due again in a couple of years, he's going to probably be looking for substantially more money. And at that point, they don't feel like they're really going to be ready and able to win and contend again. So it doesn't make sense to keep that kind of player on your roster when you can get that kind of a return now. They're probably right in that sense if they're going to go into this deep rebuild, as they have indicated. Of course, Taylor Raddysh and Boris Katchouk are making half the money that Hagel was individually. Together, they're making about the same. So they get two players, even though they're similar age. They're at different stages of their development, different stages of their NHL careers, and they're probably going to take a little bit longer to hopefully become the players that they thought they could be when they were drafted and the early promise they showed as young NHL prospects. So of course, they spent a lot of time percolating in the minors, finally get more of a shot. Towards the end of last year, they were kind of both black aces for the Lightning, got to hoist the Stanley Cup, and then they were more regulars this coming season. So they've got a lot of experience in Tampa, but they were kind of blocked out by a lot of that high-end talent that made that team such a deep juggernaut, winning back-to-back Stanley Cup championships. Now, of course, this article we're going to take a look at, written by Mark Lazarus of The Athletic, who interviews Captain Jonathan Toews and kind of reveals the real shock and surprise of this trade to Toews and what he perceives his teammates to feel as well. So it certainly kind of sends shockwaves through the Blackhawks organization, even though we've seen the fact that Davidson, the new GM, has made it clear about the rebuild. We've seen quotes and interviews and questions posed to guys like Toews and Kane, and they said all the right things, indicating that, well, we've been with the Hawks so long, we love it here. Doesn't necessarily mean we want to leave. We'll certainly consider, finishing contracts, maybe re-signing. Like, they've said all those things. Like, doesn't make you really think, okay, they're going to rebuild, I want out of here. That's never really been the feeling you've gotten before. And I don't know that we completely have that feeling now, but we're certainly trending more in that direction than we were before. So certainly, now, because The Athletic is a paid subscription, I can't obviously show you the whole entire article. That wouldn't be right of me to do. But I'm going to give you one little paragraph here, one quote from Jonathan Toews and one of the questions posed by Lazarus to him to give you an idea how he's feeling and a feeling he thinks is starting to spread through the team. So here goes. It says, when he was asked about the trade, and of course he has 1,000 games coming up, so that's part of the question, is kind of how he's feeling with the 1,000 games coming up and thoughts on the trade. His quote is, "Yeah, if Hags is a guy to get traded, if he's not a guy that's part of the rebuild, then I don't know. I don't know if anybody feels safe at this point with the way he's been playing and what he's meant to this team. I had a hard time thinking in my mind that he would be one of the guys to get shipped off, considering what he brought in." Yeah, that was a tough one to see. I'm pretty shocked of it for sure. Now, he was also went on into the article and was asked numerous questions about his future, how he's feeling. Obviously, the health issues he dealt with last year and all that. And when he was kind of asked about waiving his no trade and moving along, it certainly was not a hard, no, I don't want to leave, but it certainly wasn't, yes, I want to either. It was kind of felt like, I got the impression myself that it was kind of somewhere towards the middle. He was asked if him and Kane talk about these things, and he said, that they haven't really spoken about it at this point, but they probably will, and they usually talk about things, and da-da-da-da. It's like, really, I'm surprised. Like, considering what your team has been through in the past year plus with all the controversy and everything, it amazes me how much he says that he doesn't talk about things, which I don't entirely believe, to be completely honest. Now, obviously, we've seen reports recently that the Hawks have been getting inquiries on trades. We haven't heard Jonathan Toews' name mentioned himself, but we've heard, obviously, a lot of other players that are a little bit smaller scale or expiring contracts, like Marc-Andre Fleury. We know there's lots of interest. Dominic Kubalik, for example, Dylan Strome, Ryan Carpenter, Calvin DeHaan, they're all players that have had their names surrounded in NHL trade rumors. We very well could see a chunk of those moved out here before Monday's NHL trade deadline. Would not be a little bit surprising at all. Fleury, I mean, it's going to be a little bit more tricky because he's got full say over where he goes. And there is a chance that he may not really find an offer that's coming in that he really wants to do, and might decide just to finish the year in Chicago, become a UFA, and decide his future from there. But I think it's fair to say he's definitely done with the Blackhawks after the current season. I mean, Dominic Kubalik, for example, is a former 30-goal scorer, has been linked to the Anaheim Ducks, but he hasn't been able to quite reduplicate that since that really excellent season for him a couple of years ago. And we know that Patrick Kane, with one more year left at $10.5 million, the same as Toews, has had a lot of inquiries. We've seen it recently. The Hawks are getting calls, especially if they'll retain half the salary. That's a deal that teams could do. Like, I know the Rangers have been a team that's been linked quite extensively. They're probably the team I've heard the most making inquiries on the availability of Patrick Kane. The other thing to think about right now is not only are the Hawks going down into this deep rebuild, and will we see all these players shipped out or not, and at what level, but right now it's certainly a seller's market. And just like anything else in the world, when you see a supply and demand issue and the returns going in the direction that you need to take advantage of, this might be a time for Chicago to really consider pulling the trigger on some of these other deals that they might have thought might need to wait. They really hit a home run here with the trade involving Brandon Hagel. They got a king's ransom, in my opinion, for a player who's really not overly established, has great potential, mind you, a great young player, but still, like, Tampa really paid a real premium to get him on their roster. So can you imagine what they could command on a trade for a guy like Patrick Kane with all he's accomplished in his career? We know that the Colorado Avalanche, for example, they're a team that's been linked to some big names, trying to make some big additions before the playoffs. They're really going for it this year. We do know that they were heavily linked to Claude Giroux, which is still a possibility that they could land, but it appears as though the rumors indicate that it's more likely he's going to Florida. So if they have guys like Gabriel Landeskog and Samuel Girard on long-term injury reserve, and they have that buffer cap-wise, they would make sense too for a guy like Patrick Kane. So not to say that they're going to get that done, clearly, but it makes you wonder. There's lots of people speculating out there, and like I said, with what we saw yesterday, guys like Toews and Kane are certainly starting to rethink their position in the organization, rethink if they really want to stick around here. Do the Hawks really want them to move on? Because if so, maybe they should do this organization a favor, let them be traded for a good return, and kind of that's their way of kind of giving back to the organization. Do they really want to be a part of this? If they're really going to tear it down that far, and they're going to go through some tough times here, maybe they're better off to move along and finish their career elsewhere and still have a chance to be in a competitive situation and possibly go after another Stanley Cup before it's all said and done. Now, another player, though, that's going to be on the top of a lot of people's minds with this is Alex Debrincat. I mean, he's 25 years old. He's under contract for a little while longer, and he's a perennial 35 to 40 goal scorer. Wouldn't shock me if he hits 50 goals someday. He's obviously a player who was underrated coming into the draft when he was drafted a number of years back, and has far exceeded expectations. But he's just a pure goal scorer and one of the best in the NHL with like I said, good contract, good age. I can see there being a ton of interest, and after trading Hagel and with all the talk about Toews and Kane maybe moving on, you have to think that they're getting a lot of calls on a guy like Debrincat. Can you imagine what kind of return they could command from teams after what they got from Brandon Hagel? I mean, Hagel is not the same kind of player. Like, Debrincat is a proven 35, 40 goal scorer with, I'm not even convinced, like I said, that he's even peaked at his ceiling yet. So can you just imagine what kind of return the Blackhawks could use in that regard? If you look around the NHL teams, especially that are kind of coming, that have gone through a rebuild and are starting to come out and want to add that extra, younger but yet experienced player, like in that mid-20s range, that's a proven player that can help take them from kind of coming out of the rebuild to being playoff / cup contender like we saw the Rangers do. They accelerated their rebuild by bringing in Artemi Panarin. They were already rebuilding for a while. They started to get a lot of good pieces in place, and then they went into free agency and got Panarin, and that took them a long ways, up here in the rankings. I mean, look where they are now. They're probably about 2 years ahead of where they thought they were going to be based on some of these other moves they were able to make. So you look at other teams like the Ottawa Senators or the Detroit Red Wings, teams like that have been rebuilding for the past few years and are got a lot of the pieces in place, but are still kind of missing a couple pieces to really help them make the next big leap. He could be that guy. So I guarantee you there's a lot. Or in the other case, you get contenders that are looking for that piece to put him over the top, right? Like either way, like this guy would get so much interest between him and Kane. Can you imagine the returns that the Blackhawks could get? They could be, getting a king's ransom here and be loaded with picks and prospects for the next 2 to 3 years to really accelerate this rebuild and take this team to another real set of success and potential Stanley Cups, maybe 5, 6, 7 years down the road. So to me, based on the Hagel trade, I think this is a signal of the times are changing in Chicago. I think based on the report here from Lazarus and this article interviewing Jonathan Toews, it certainly has the veterans thinking that nobody is safe and that maybe it is time to move on. It sounds like, it's not a guarantee he's saying he wants to move on, but for the first time, you kind of hear some doubt in his answers, in his voice. Obviously he's not speaking for Kane, but you get to kind of help by thinking he might be thinking the same thing. I mean, I saw reports just a few days ago that, Patrick Kane was considering the option of not only finishing his contract in Chicago, but maybe even re-signing for a little bit longer. But is he going to want to go through that? Like I said, if a guy like Hagel is tradable in a rebuild who's 23 years old with only like a solid year or so of experience, nobody on that roster is really safe. But it makes sense on the process here if you think about it. Like I said, does it make sense when he's 26, 27 years old, going to be heading towards UFA status, looking to really cash in his next contract? If they're not ready to really be contenders, does it make sense for him to be there and for them to pay him? It doesn't, which is good asset management. Sell high while they're still young, while they're in their prime, to get back what you can so that you can have the necessary assets in place for when you are going to be in that position a number of years down the road. But I really think there's a real strong possibility that we're going to see some more moves out of Chicago before the deadline closes on Monday. I don't know that we're going to see anything substantial like a Kane or a Toews, but I do think it's a real solid chance we're going to see Kubalik, Fleury, Carpenter, possibly, maybe Calvin DeHaan, possibly Dylan Strome. Alex Debrincat, I think, would be more likely in the offseason if they're going to do it. And again, with Debrincat and Toews and Kane, they don't need to rush this. They can wait and get it the right deal here. They can be patient and make sure that they get it done correctly. Obviously, they want to do right by these guys too and see what kind of place they can send them to help them with their careers and at the same time get themselves an awesome return like they saw on Brandon Hagel. But to me, if you get a team like the Rangers or the Avalanche come calling on Patrick Kane, you have to think they're going to at least approach him with asking him, what do you think on this? Because I know, especially in the case of the Avalanche, if they were all in on Giroux and that doesn't work out, they're clearly wanting to make a substantial move. I'm just not sure who else they could go after. They were also linked to Joe Pavelski, who's ended up staying in Dallas, so that's off the table. They want a solid veteran guy that added in that lineup who can be versatile and kind of help things out. Like Kane would be awesome in Colorado. I have no doubt. And his contract still expires before they have to get the Nathan MacKinnon extension in place as well. So it does work out. They could handle things there. And at the same time, if they're going to lose Nazem Kadri to free agency with a big contract, they can get Kane at half the price because of Chicago retaining salary. That could kind of help offset things so that they're not really losing a step next year. So to me, it makes lots of sense that they would go after him. And I can understand the Blackhawks appear to be listening, but I don't know if we'll pull the trigger here. We'll see. Some interesting times coming up. I think lots of pain, lots of turnover in Chicago. Let me know your thoughts. Give me some mock trades on some of these top names like Toews, Kane, Debrincat. Where do you see as good landing spots? What do you think are reasonable returns based on what we've seen in the last few days here with NHL trades? The market's certainly heading into be a seller's market here recently. If that continues, Chicago could land themselves a ton of riches heading into the full-scale rebuild that could help them come out of the rebuild even faster. So let me know your thoughts. We'll discuss further down in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.